Okay, so hello and welcome to American Lit. I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm just sharing my screen with you just so we can have those slides to ground us today, and you should still be able to see me. So welcome to American Lit, and here's our agenda for today. So we are starting with a journal as a norm, just to ground us into class, get us ready to think about some of these concepts. So we'll journal for a few minutes. And then we're working with tone. So I have a few activities that we'll participate in to get us thinking about tone and learn a bit more about that concept. And I have two goals for us today. Can I have a volunteer to read those goals? And I would ask for a student volunteer, but if there is a student who might not seem necessarily engaged, I might ask them to read those goals just to call them back in like a warm but still high expectation sort of way. And so those are our two goals, and I want you to hold me accountable to those goals. So at the end of class, I'm going to come back to those, and I want you to make sure that we did that we hit those goals, all right? So I'll have a few questions for you, but keep your mind thinking about, did Miss Weaver accomplish the goals today, all right? So here's our journal prompt. What dreams do you have for your future? I want you to write about the dreams and ambitions you have for high school, for life afterwards. Maybe you're interested in college, entering the workforce, whatever your plan is, I want you to write about that. And then after you finish writing, I'll invite you to underline or star a golden line, but I'll give you more information about that part in about 5 minutes. So I'd have students write for about 5 minutes, give or take, depending on what I'm seeing when I look out around the room. If students are still writing pretty steadily at the 5-minute mark, I might add 1 to 2 minutes just to give them that time to think through those thoughts. So we have about 1 minute left. Just wrap up some final thoughts you have there. And if you're finished writing, or if you're just about finished, I want you to go back and underline or star a golden line. So a phrase or a sentence that you think is really notable, that when you wrote it down, you were like, I need to share this with the rest of the class. They need to hear my thoughts. That's what I want you to do. Find that part, and I want you to share it with me, okay? So after students have done that, I would like to see everybody's penciled down and looking up, just so I know you're here and you're with me. Once I see that the majority of students are finished with the journal, I'd like you to share with the person next to you your golden line. Just share golden line. You don't have to go too in depth. It'll be a pretty brief sharing. So have students do that for about a minute before we open it up to whole class sharing. So would anyone like to share their golden line with the class? If there isn't anyone that's maybe jumping up to do that, I journal with my students during journaling, so I might note my golden line and share that with the class to kick off sharing and maybe ease some of those tensions and fears about being the one that shares and starts the sharing. So after I have about 4 students, give or take, that share, I will shift from the journal. So put those journals to the side, but keep thinking about dreams, okay? Because remember, we had dreams in our goal for the day, but I also want us to think about dreams as we move through some of the activities that we're going to talk about. So this next part might seem a little silly as we move from dreams to smells, but I want you to look at these words and talk with the person next to you about what these words make you think of. When you read these words, all synonyms of smell, are they positive? Are they negative? Which words are really powerful? What images do you think of? Just comes to mind, anything. So I leave that pretty open-ended for them, as this is one of the first activities that they participate in. And I'm circulating around the room during this time, picking up on what students are saying, so that when we move to whole group sharing, I might have a particular group of students that I can say, I heard you talking about stink. Can you say anything about what you thought of? Is it positive? Is it negative? And so that circulating is a bit more intentional during that time. So after students have about 3 minutes, I'll call everyone back. Does anyone have a word they want to start with? Somewhere word that really feels like it's powerful to you. Might get some engagement there. I also, if I have a really shy, quiet group, I might pick out a word to start with. So stench. Did anyone pick stench? How do we feel? Can I just get like thumbs up for positive, thumbs down for negative? And assess where they're at that way, and maybe ask some students after they've given me the thumbs up or down, what made them think of it that way. But some of what I'm looking for here is comparing stink and stench to garbage and negative smells, and fragrance and scent to positive smells like food cooking in the kitchen, or cologne or perfume, something that you think smells good. So when we're talking about whether or not words have a positive or negative association with them, we're thinking about their connotation. Does anyone know what connotation means? Okay, so if you don't, that's totally cool, because I have it on the next slide. Can anyone read the definition for us? So I'll have someone read the definition, and as you can see here, it's the associated or secondary meaning of a word. So I have us thinking about connotation, because when we think about what a word makes us think of, positive or negative, or if it comes up with images of garbage like stench might, or perfume like fragrance might, we're really getting at something else that those words point us to, which is tone, okay? Now, does anyone have any familiarity with tone? Do we know what tone means, or where you might have heard tone before? Participation is low. I might make them think of tone in terms of sound. So give that as a hint to push us forward. So depending on student feedback, I think a common response might be tone of voice. So I would blend that in a little bit, because I think there's a bridge there. So moving to our next slide, for those of you who aren't familiar, tone is the attitude of a writer toward a subject or an audience. So when you're thinking about tone of voice, because tone of voice, that makes sense, it is sort of a way to look at attitude, isn't it? Like if I'm calling you on the phone, right, and you can just tell I am bored, it's from my tone of voice, right? Because you can tell that like yeah, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like I'm not paying attention to you. My tone of voice sounds like I'm not engaged, right? And you might come away from that conversation being like, Miss Weaver has a really bad attitude, and she is just not, she's not fun to talk to. She seems like she's not engaged with what I'm talking about. She's not interested in me. That would never happen. I'm very interested. But you see, that's where I would sort of come at that with students. I might use student names, maybe students who I know are friends with each other, to get a little bit more engagement from them. So we're going to think about tone through the lens of two poems. So I'm handing out the poetry handout at this time. The poetry handout is linked in the lesson plan. It says poetry handout in instructional materials. That's where you can find a copy of that. So as I'm passing out these poems, can someone just read the title of the first poem? And the title of the first poem is The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac. And then I would have someone else read the title of the second poem, which is Harlem by Langston Hughes. And I'm having students look at these titles to do a little bit of pre-reading. So I want you all to just look at these poems, and what do you notice? Is there anything that you notice about them? And they might not notice anything right off the bat. They might notice the structure of the poems. There might be a range of things. They might notice that Harlem starts with a question. Any of those are fine. I just want them to do a little bit of background knowledge generation if they have experience with that. Also, we'll ask them, does anyone know who Tupac is? Just so we can get people who might be like really avid rap fans to release some of that and share some of that with the class. And if not, then I will share with them that he's a rapper. That might be a little aged out for 11th grade nowadays. I'm not sure, but Tupac is a rapper from the late 90s, and he wrote some poetry along with some of his rap songs, which might also be considered poetry, depending what camp you're in. So we are going to start off by reading one of his poems, The Rose That Grew from Concrete. So I'd ask for a student volunteer to read the poem aloud, and I might call a student to read the poem who maybe I feel is really engaged with Tupac, or a student who isn't totally engaged with the lesson and I want to call them back in. So after that student reads, thank you for reading the poem for us. And the rest of you, I'd like you to reread this poem, okay? So I want you to reread, and I want you to underline any words that stand out to you, just any words that seem significant. And I want you to think about connotation. Remember how we did that with those smell words. I want you to underline any words that seem important to you, and then I want you to think about the connotation. So give students about 4 minutes to do that. And then I would move to the next slide, which would maybe originally be blank, because I would want students to give me some of the words that they came up with, but without having students, obviously I sort of had to make that myself. But I will model some of the connotation work for this one. So while I circulated while you were underlining, I noticed a lot of you noted rose, crack, concrete, and breathe fresh air. Okay, so the next poem is going to be your responsibility, but for this poem, I'll walk us through some of that connotation work, okay, and lead us towards the tone. So I'm thinking about roses, right? And roses, I've seen them like a lot on Valentine's Day or at prom, thinking about like a romantic sort of, but it's a generally positive view, right? Do we feel like good about roses? Yeah. What about crack, concrete? The words themselves feel almost harsh, right? Like crack, concrete, that's like, it's a little harsh. If you fall on concrete, it's pretty hard. Like you'll probably get like a scraped knee or something if you fall on concrete. It's not very soft or welcoming. So that's interesting, right? We have this rose, this beautiful rose, and this concrete that's harsh and rough, and we don't really see roses growing in concrete, right? Roses grow in like dirt and like ground that's fertile. And then we move to this fresh air. So if you are inside all day and I go outside and that feels good, doesn't it? Doesn't it to take like a deep breath of the air outside? I know I feel good when I do that. And doesn't it feel sort of relaxing too? Like if you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, and you breathe outside and it's some fresh air, it feels like calming, right? Okay, so we have this beautiful rose, we have this harsh concrete, and we have this calming fresh air that's almost like a relief, right? All right, so that along with reading the whole poem, I might think that the tone is sort of, it is affected by this beautiful rose coming out of this harsh concrete, and then there's a sense of relief, right? Okay, so the tone then towards the end might be a bit hopeful, right? Because we're coming out of this concrete, but the rose is still growing and it's gonna live a long life, and it's breathing this fresh air, right? It was able to survive the concrete. So that might be how I would walk through it, okay? Do we have any questions about this part before we move to Harlem? I know I went through quickly just for time, but truly, if students do have questions in this part, I would want to pause and give them more feedback in that area. But then once we move past that part, then I want students to take the reins with Harlem. Okay, so do we have a student volunteer to read this poem? And that student might read through, thank the student. And just like the last time, we are going to reread this. And I want you to underline any words that seem like they are strong language and like they stand out to you, both positive and negative. Okay, and then I want you to write the connotation of what associations do you have with those words in the box next to the poem, okay? So I have students do that and circulate around the room and just see what progress students are making during this time. Give them about 4 minutes and then come back. Okay, so you should have a few words underlined and some of the connotations noted in the box. I want you to share that with the person next to you, okay? What did they pick? Did they pick something different? You wanna collaborate there? That's great, I'm fine with that. But your goal here is to come at the tone. So once you have looked through some of those words and discussed that a little bit, then I should be hearing that you've come up with some tone words, all right? And I'll be around to check in. So I'll circulate around, and my goal through circulating is to identify at least 3 pairs that have some findings that I think the rest of the class should hear, right? Some students who might have picked out some really strong language and they seem to really be understanding this tone stuff so that they can model that for the other students in the class. I also am looking to see what students might be struggling, to see what groups might be just kind of staring ahead or not really